Hello everybody, welcome to Matthew chapter 23. I'm here at Kensington Metro Park today, not at U of M where I usually am. So, Matthew chapter 23 is a chapter where Jesus is basically yelling at a bunch of Pharisees. This is toward the end of his ministry. He had come to Jerusalem for the last time, and he speaks out publicly to the Pharisees, and he does it in a way that's not so subtle. I feel like in the past he's been very subtle. He has been basically telling people, don't tell anybody who I am, don't tell anybody about these things that have been happening. And now he's basically coming right out to the Pharisees, the scary people, and and telling him, straight up that he's God. And so I've decided not to walk on this lake. It's a little bit scary. There's like a wet patch over there. Anyway, so this section is usually called the 7 woes of the Pharisees. And Jesus is basically calling them hypocrites. Now, when we hear hypocrites, it's instantly an insult, probably because of Jesus' example. But back then it was probably insulting, but probably not as much, because when they heard hypocrites, it just meant actors. It really means like people that wear masks, in the same way that actors wore masks back then. And so he basically speaks up like he's in the temple, and he's just really letting them have it. And it's important to say that he's doing this for a good reason. It's not like he's just being mean for the sake of being mean. And I don't even know if it's mean. I mean, it's definitely, he's being, I would say, direct. He's being harsh, but the Pharisees were really leading people astray. They were really getting in the way of people's salvation, and they were misusing the temple, and they needed to be exposed, and it really was an act of love. So he starts off, he says, you scribes and Pharisees, you are you're being extra godly, but inside you're not. He talks about these things called phylacteries. They're these boxes that you would put the 10 Commandments in, because there's a part in the Old Testament where it says, figuratively, you should wear these on your forehead and on your hands. And because they were so legalistic, they would literally take these boxes and they would stick them on their heads, and inside of the box was a little writing of the 10 Commandments. And Jesus is saying, oh, and they thought they were more godly if their boxes were bigger. So here's these Pharisees walking around with these big boxes on their forehead, and then they would wear these tassels really long. And he was saying, that's not what true godliness looks like. True godliness doesn't come from having a bigger box on your head. And so he says the 7 woes. So I have a little notes here, because this is all like a monologue. It's not like I can explain a couple of parables, So he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. It says, you shut the kingdom on the people's faces. At this point, he's saying you make these, you make these converts, you get people to follow you, and you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. And then he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you're like blind guides. And then at that point, he talks a lot about how they swear not to the temple, but by the gold in the temple. And he's saying, you know, that the thing that makes the temple holy is not the gold. It's God. He's like, you're swearing by these things, you know, you're looking at this world and not the things of heaven. And so next he says, you tithe your mint and your dill. This is kind of funny. He's saying, you know, it's like you go in your garden and you know, let's say you pick up some mint, you know, for your tea or for your lamb, whatever you use it for, whatever spices you use, you know, you just pull out of your garden and they're saying, well, 1/10 of that belongs to the Lord. And he's not really criticizing them for it, but he's saying, you do these things, but you forget about justice and mercy and faithfulness. And he says it's almost like, and this is something that they would actually do, they would have a strainer for their drinks so they wouldn't accidentally drink a gnat or some like small bug. And he's like, you know, you strain your drinks, but meanwhile you're eating a camel, which back then, you know, a camel was probably the biggest animal in their area, and you weren't supposed to eat camels because you weren't supposed to have anything with hooves. So he's like, you're straining you're straining the bugs, but you're eating the camel. And then he says, you clean, you know, the next two are very similar. He says, you clean the outside of the cup, but you don't clean the inside, you know, your dishes. He's like, the important part is to clean the inside. You know, that's where the germs would be. And he's like, you clean the outside, but you don't clean the inside. You know, you care about the appearances of what you're doing, and not, you know, you're missing the point. And he says the same thing with the next one. He's like, you're like whitewashed tombs. You know, they'd put the bones of the dead people back there in these small boxes, and the outside of them were really pretty. I actually watched a documentary last night where they were talking about one of these Pharisees that probably ended up, you know, there's a lot of evidence that he ended up regretting sentencing Jesus to the cross, but they were showing this thing that he was in, and really ornate design, and it looked really nice. And he's like, but inside, you're dead bones. And then he says, and this is the last one. He says, you build tombs for these prophets. Now, I don't know exactly much about the prophets that they're talking about, but the Pharisees at some point realized that there were some prophets that God sent, and they didn't like the message, and so they had them killed. So Jesus is saying, you know, you make these shrines for these prophets that you killed, and you say, if I was in that time, I wouldn't have had him killed. You know, I would have known. And it's funny that he's saying that, because here they're about to sentence him to death. But the more amazing part there is that Jesus says, I sent them. He's not saying God sent them. He comes right out and says, I sent these prophets to you, and you killed them. And you're saying I wouldn't have killed them if they were in my time. But it's very clear that they would have, because they're just about to kill Jesus. Anyway, he says something that I think is really interesting. He says, "O Jerusalem," he's talking still to the same people, and he's like, he's like, how much I wish I could have been like a hen who holds her wings open and you know, takes the little chicks under her arms. He's like, how I would have done that for you, how much I want to do that for you. And he's like, but you guys don't let me. Every time I try to open up my wings to take you under, you run away. And you know, it's easy to look at things like this as just you know, a historical event. You know, this is what Jesus said. But I think that God does that for us still. He opens up his wings and he asks us to, you know, to come under his wing, and we just run away. And if you're watching this, you're probably like me, where, you know, I follow the Bible. I'm trying to be a good person, and sometimes I think that I am a good person. But it's just so easy sometimes to be one of these Pharisees, you know, to clean up the outside. You know, I think it's harder for people like us who claim to know the difference between right and wrong because we read the Bible, and then when we actually do it, we want to hide it because we know that we're hypocrites. So yeah, I feel like this is something that we can often look at it, and I would even say I would read it and I would say, man, Jesus really gave it to those guys. You know, I laugh, I smile, you know, I still do. But in some ways, he's talking to us. So, you know, don't smile too much. We so often just want to whitewash the outside. So, all right, that is Matthew chapter 23. Have a great day.